There's a difference between being alone and being isolated, and almost nobody makes it, and the failure to make it has cost a great many old men their lives. I'm going to be blunt about that because I've watched it happen. I had a friend named Frank. His wife died about 4 years before Helen did. Frank was a decent man, competent, well-liked in the ordinary way that a man who's lived in one town his whole life is well-liked. And after his wife died, he pulled in. Not dramatically. He didn't announce anything. He just stopped answering the phone quite as often, stopped coming to the things he used to come to, let the invitations go by until people stopped extending them. And about 2 years into that, Frank had a bad stretch. I don't know the details, and it isn't mine to tell. And there was nobody close enough to notice it was happening. He died at 76, alone, in a house that people drove past every day without any idea what was going on inside it. Frank was alone. That would have been survivable. Frank was isolated. That wasn't. I've thought about Frank more than almost anything else in these 7 years, because the distance between his situation and mine was never very large. Same town, same age, near enough. Same trade, roughly. Both of us lost the woman we'd been married to for most of our lives. On paper, in 2017, Frank and I were the same man about 4 years apart. The difference wasn't character. Frank was not weak. Frank was in some respects a better man than I am. More generous, easier with people, funnier. The difference was structural. When his wife died, he had a phone and a house, and not much else in place. And the not much else was invisible to everybody, including him, because when she was alive, she'd been generating his entire social life, and nobody notices infrastructure until it fails. I had almost the same problem, and I nearly went the same way. The 2 years I spent in this house not answering the phone were 2 years on Frank's road. What pulled me off it was partly luck and partly other people refusing to give up on me. Susan noticing, Elaine trying for a year before I said yes. A man named George calling on a Wednesday evening when I nearly didn't pick up. It was not primarily my own doing, and I don't want anyone hearing this as a man congratulating himself for having managed something Frank failed at. I got lucky in who kept knocking, and then, eventually, I started doing the work myself. I'm 82 years old. My name is Walter. I've lived alone in this house since my wife Helen died in October of 2017. I am alone a great deal, most hours of most days, by a considerable margin, and I am not isolated. And the reason I'm not isolated is that there are 5 people I talk to every single week without fail. And each one of those 5 does something for me that the other 4 cannot do. That's the part I want to get across today. It isn't about the number. I could have 15 acquaintances and still be isolated. What matters is that there are 5 different kinds of connection a person needs. And if you've got all 5 covered, you can be alone almost all the time and be perfectly all right. And if you're missing 2 or 3 of them, you can be surrounded by people and still be in trouble. Sit with me, the fire's going. Let me tell you about the 5. The first is my son David, and he calls every Sunday. David is 58. He's an engineer in Portland, about 2 hours south of here. He has a wife and 2 children who are mostly grown now, and a life that is full in the way a life is full at 58, and he calls me every Sunday, and has not missed one that I can recall in 7 years. What David gives me, the function he serves that nobody else can, is that he is the person who has known me longest in the world. Think about what that means for a moment, because I didn't fully understand it until Helen died. When she was alive, she was that person, 54 years of knowing me. She'd seen me at 30 and 40 and 60. She knew the whole arc, and when you have someone who's seen the whole arc, you never have to explain the beginning of anything because they were there for it. When she died, David became that person by default. He's known me since 1966. He saw me in my 20s, which almost nobody living did. He remembers this house being built. He remembers his grandmother. He remembers a version of me that I'm not sure I remember anymore. The young father, the man in his 30s running a business and worrying about money and not being home enough. And what that means practically is that with David, there's no context to supply. If I say something about the year the business nearly went under, He knows what year I mean and what it was like in this house that year. If I mention his mother, he doesn't need to be told anything about who she was. If I say I've been thinking about my father, he understands that I'm talking about a man who died at 51 when I was 23. And he understands what that did to me, because he's watched it work on me his whole life. That's not a small thing. When you're old, most of the people who knew the whole story are dead. What's left are people who met you in your 60s or 70s, and who know a version of you that's the last chapter of a long book they never read. And there's something quietly exhausting about only ever being known as your last chapter. With David, I'm the whole book. He's read all of it. I'll say something about what these calls are actually like, because I don't want to make it sound more elevated than it is. Mostly we talk about ordinary things. His work, my work, something in the news, what he's got going on at the house. A lot of it is talk about wood. He's not a carpenter, but he's my son. And he grew up in a shop and he understands enough to have a real conversation about a joint that isn't behaving. Some Sundays we don't say anything of consequence at all. But every so often, 4 or 5 times a year, one of those calls goes somewhere. He'll ask something real, or I will, and we'll be on the phone for 2 hours talking about his mother or his childhood, or something he's carrying. Those conversations are the deepest I have with anyone now. And I could not have them with somebody who didn't know the whole story. And I want to say something about how the relationship with David has changed, because I think it's a thing that happens to every father and son who both live long enough and that nobody prepares you for. For most of our lives, I was the capable one. That's the arrangement between a father and a son. The father knows how, the father can do it. The son learns. That was true from 1966 until sometime in the last decade. And I never questioned it because it was simply the shape of things. It isn't true anymore. David is 58 and at the height of his powers. And I'm 82 and I'm not. He handles things now. He came up last spring and dealt with a problem on my roof that I have no business being on. He's the one who understands the insurance and the various modern arrangements that I find increasingly baffling. There are things now that I ask him to do because I can't do them, and the asking is not comfortable, and I do it anyway. What surprised me is that this hasn't diminished the relationship. I expected it would. I expected that the day I became the one being helped would be the day something between us was over. It hasn't been. It's just become a different thing. 2 grown men, one of whom is running out of road, both of whom know it, neither of whom has to say so. He's careful with me about it. That's the part that gets me. He'll suggest something in a way that leaves me room to refuse. He'll do a thing without announcing that he's doing it for me. He's protecting my dignity, deliberately, in small ways, week after week, and he learned that from somebody, and I'm not entirely sure it was me. I've told him I've noticed. Once, on the phone, a couple of years ago, I said, I know what you're doing, and I'm grateful. And he said something non-committal because we're both men of a certain kind. But he knew what I meant. The second is my daughter Susan, and she calls every Thursday. Susan is 55, she's a nurse in Boston, and she's been a nurse for 30 years. And it has made her into a particular kind of person. What Susan gives me is that she's the one who notices. Everybody has somebody in their life who notices, or they should. It's a specific function, and it's not the same as loving somebody. David loves me, and David does not notice. He's a good son and a decent man, and he could talk to me for an hour without registering that something's wrong. That's not a criticism. Most people are like that, and I'm like that, and I was like that with Helen for the first 20 years of our marriage. Susan notices. She's noticed things about me on the phone from 200 miles away that I hadn't noticed about myself standing in my own kitchen. She's the one who opened my refrigerator in the spring of 2019 and stood there looking at it long enough that I knew I was in trouble before she'd said a word. She's the one who said, on a Thursday call in the second year, that I seemed further away than I used to be. And when I said I hadn't moved, she said, I know you haven't moved. That's not what I mean. She does this partly because it's her nature and partly because 30 years of nursing has trained her to assess a person in the first 90 seconds of contact. She can't turn it off. I'm sure it's a nuisance to her sometimes. For me, it has been, on more than one occasion, genuinely important. Now I want to say something about the Thursday call, because there's a thing about it that took us a few years to work out. For the first 2 or 3 years, those calls were assessments. She'd call, and she'd ask how I was, and she'd listen to the answer and everything under the answer, and I'd perform a version of being fine, and both of us knew what was happening. It was a nurse checking on a patient. It was a daughter monitoring a father she was worried about. And it was awful, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because I had become someone who was checked on, rather than someone who was talked to, and that's a diminishment that eats at a man. What fixed it was that I started calling her, not instead of the Thursday call. In addition, I'd call on a Tuesday to ask her advice about something, and the asking for advice was the key, because it repositioned the whole thing. She wasn't checking on me anymore. She was helping me with something which put her in the position of having something to offer, rather than something to monitor. And now the Thursday calls are different. She still notices. She can't help it, and I'm grateful for it. But we talk about her life now. Her work, which is hard in ways she doesn't tell most people about. Her marriage, her children, a book she read. My health comes up as one topic among several, rather than as the purpose of the call. That's the relationship I want with my daughter at 82. Not a patient and a nurse. A father and a daughter who talk on Thursdays. I want to say something about why the noticing function matters so much. Because I think it's the one people most underestimate, and it's the one that most often isn't covered. Here's the problem. The instrument you use to assess your own condition is your own mind. And your own mind is precisely the thing that goes wrong first. When a man starts sliding into isolation, into not eating properly, into the gray stretch where the days blur and nothing gets done, the sliding does not announce itself. It doesn't feel like sliding. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like a perfectly ordinary week in which you happen not to have gone anywhere or spoken to anyone or cooked a proper meal. And there's a reason for each individual instance, and the reasons are all perfectly good, and the fact that there have been 11 of them in a row is not visible from inside. I could not see my own condition in that first year and a half. I want to be clear about that. I was not lying to Susan when I said I was fine. I believed it. My assessment of my own situation was that I was managing, and my assessment was wrong, and there was no mechanism inside me capable of detecting that it was wrong. That's what an outside instrument is for. Susan could see it because she was outside it. Her reading of me was accurate in a way my reading of myself was not, and the only reason I ever found out I was in trouble was that somebody who wasn't me was paying close attention. Everybody needs that. Not everybody has it, and the people who don't have it are running blind on their own self-assessment, which is precisely the instrument that fails. So if you take one thing from this whole conversation, take this. Find your noticer. Somebody who sees you often enough and closely enough to detect a change. And then, and this is the part that requires something of you, let them notice. Don't perform being fine. Don't manage them. When they ask how you are, tell them. And if the answer is not good, say that instead of the other thing. I performed being fine for Susan for 18 months, and it very nearly cost me a great deal. The performance is instinctive for men of my generation, and it is one of the most dangerous habits we have. The third is my granddaughter Lily, and we write letters. Lily is 20. She's at university, and she and I have a correspondence, actual letters on paper, in envelopes with stamps, that we've kept going for about 6 years now, since she was 14. It started as a school thing, I think, some assignment about interviewing an older relative. She wrote to me instead of calling, which I found charming, and I wrote back, and then she wrote again, and neither of us ever stopped. What Lily gives me is the new. She is the pipeline through which the current world enters this house. I want to be careful about how I say this because I don't want it to sound like I keep a young person around as a novelty. That's not it. What I mean is that at 82, living alone in the woods, retired from a trade I practiced for 45 years, my world has a natural tendency to close. Everything in this house is old. Everything I know is old. My opinions were mostly formed before 1990, and my references are from a country that doesn't exist anymore. And a mind in that condition left alone will calcify. It will go over the same ground, get more certain about things it should be less certain about, and slowly become the mind of an old man who has stopped learning, which is a condition I've watched in others and am frightened of. Lily prevents that. She sends me books I would never have found. The geology book that changed how I look at every stone wall in this county. That was Lily. The birds, the stars, which I can now name a few of on a clear night at 82, which I could not do at 75. She tells me what she's studying and what she thinks about it, and some of what she thinks I disagree with, and we argue in letters, which is a very good way to argue because you have a week to think before you reply. And she asks me things. That's the other half of it. She asks me about the 50s, about what the mill towns were like, about what my father did and how people lived. She's genuinely curious about a world she can only reach through people like me. And being asked those questions by someone who actually wants the answers is one of the great pleasures available to an old man. It makes me a resource rather than a relic. The letters matter, specifically. I want to say that. We could do this by telephone or by the machine or whatever the young people use now, and it wouldn't be the same. A letter is slow. You think before you write. You say things in a letter you wouldn't say out loud. I've written things to that girl about her grandmother that I've never said to anyone in speech. And a letter arrives. It's a physical object that comes to your house on a Wednesday, addressed in a young person's handwriting. And you can hold it, and you can read it 3 times, and you can keep it in a drawer, which I do. I have 6 years of Lily's letters in the drawer of the desk in the front room. There's something else about Lily that I've only recently understood, and it's the reason I've kept this correspondence up through years, when I was not in a condition to keep anything up. I am going to die reasonably soon. I'm 82. That's not morbid. It's arithmetic. And when I go, what I know goes with me. Everything about Helen, about my parents, about my father's mill, about what this county was like in 1950, when there were still farms on this road, about how you build a house without the machines they use now. All of that is currently stored in exactly one place, which is my head, and my head has a limited remaining term. Those letters are the only version of any of it that will still exist afterward. 6 years of them in a drawer, in my handwriting, describing a world that will be entirely gone within a decade or 2 of my going. Lily doesn't know that's what she's doing. She thinks she's writing to her grandfather. What she's actually doing is running an archive. I've thought about telling her. I probably will at some point, but I'm also content to let her find out. To let her be 70 years old someday with a drawer of letters from a man who's been dead for 50 years, telling her about her great-grandmother's garden and the way the paper mill smelled on a wet morning in 1949. That's a kind of continuing that I didn't expect to have, and that means more to me than I can easily explain. It's the closest thing to permanence that's available to a person like me. And it costs a stamp. The 4th is Elaine, who lives down the road, and we have coffee. Elaine Poulin is 74. She's been in the house about a half-mile down the road since 1988. Her husband is alive but not well, and mostly doesn't leave the house. She and Helen were friendly, not close. The friendliness of 2 women who see each other at the post office and the church and know each other's business the way people in a small town do. Elaine comes for coffee most weeks. Sometimes I go there. It's not scheduled exactly, but it happens. And if 2 weeks go by, one of us usually makes it happen. What Elaine gives me is proximity. She is the person who is physically near. This is the function that most people don't think about at all until they need it, and it's the one Frank was missing. Elaine is a half-mile away. She drives past my house most days. She knows what time my lights go on. She knows that if my truck hasn't moved in 3 days, something might be wrong. She has a key to this house, and I have a key to hers. I want to be plain about what that means at 82. It means that if I go down in the yard in February, the odds of somebody finding me before it matters are dramatically higher than they would otherwise be. That's not a comfortable thing to say out loud, and I'm saying it anyway, because I think a lot of people my age don't have that and haven't thought about it and should. But it isn't only insurance. That's the thing I didn't expect. The coffee with Elaine is genuinely one of the better hours of my week, and it's the least intense of all 5 of these relationships. We don't talk about anything of consequence. We talk about the road, the weather, the town, who sold what to whom, what the town office is doing wrong this month, whether the plow came through early enough. It is ordinary talk of the sort that people who live near each other have had since the beginning of villages. And I have come to understand that this ordinary talk is not filler. It is one of the primary ways human beings are together. 54 years of marriage was, in terms of raw hours, mostly 2 people talking about nothing much in a kitchen. That's what I lost most of when Helen died, and it's the thing that's hardest to replace, because you can't schedule it and you can't do it over the telephone. Not really. It requires physical proximity and low stakes, and no agenda. Elaine gives me that. An hour a week of talking about nothing with somebody who lives down the road. It is, I think, more essential to my well-being than several things that sound more important. There's one more piece of the proximity function I want to name, and it's physical rather than conversational. When you live alone, nobody touches you. Helen and I touched constantly for 54 years, without either of us thinking about it. A hand on a shoulder passing in the kitchen, sitting close on the sofa, sleeping in the same bed for 19,000 nights. That stops absolutely and instantly when the person dies. I went in that first year, months at a time, without another human being touching me at all. Not once, not a handshake. I did not notice it consciously. It's not the sort of thing a man of my formation puts words to. But something in me was going without a thing it had had every day for over half a century. The people who live near you are the ones who touch you. Elaine puts a hand on my arm when she leaves. The Sullivan's baby grabs my finger. David hugs me coming and going, which he didn't do when he was younger and started doing after his mother died. You can't get that over the telephone. It's a reason to make sure at least one of your 5 is somebody physically in the room with you on a regular basis. A man can live on phone calls for a while. Not forever. The 5th is Marie, and we have lunch once a month, and she's the only one of the 5 who's in the same situation I'm in. Marie was married to my friend Bob. Bob died at 78 of lung cancer, and a couple of years after Helen. He and I had been friends since the 60s, worked together on and off, drank together, fished a little, the friendship of 2 working men in a small town that lasted 50 years, without either of us ever once discussing what it meant. Marie and I were friendly for all those decades, in the way that couples are friendly. And then Bob died, and about 6 months later I called her, mostly out of duty, and we had lunch, and we have had lunch roughly once a month ever since. What Marie gives me is that I don't have to explain anything. That's it. That's the whole function. And it's enormous. With David and Susan, I manage. I don't want to worry them. There's a version of my situation I present to my children that is honest but curated, and every widowed parent listening knows exactly what I mean. With Lily, I'm the grandfather. There are things I wouldn't put on a 20-year-old. With Elaine, we don't go there. That's not what that relationship is. With Marie, there's nothing to manage. She knows. If I say the house was bad last week, she doesn't need to be told what that means, or reassured about it, or asked follow-up questions. She says, "Yes, February." And that's the whole conversation, and it's complete. We talk about them too. Bob and Helen. Nobody else in my life wants to talk about Helen for very long. The children find it hard, and other people get uncomfortable. And there's a general sense after 7 years that a man should be moving along. Marie will talk about Helen all afternoon. She'll tell me things about her I didn't know, things Helen said to her that Helen never said to me. And I tell her things about Bob. Between us, we keep 2 dead people in the conversation, which is one of the great services the bereaved can do for each other, because the dead go quiet very fast in most rooms. I want to say something delicate here, because people always wonder. There is nothing romantic between Marie and me. There isn't going to be. We're 2 people in our 80s who each had a marriage that was the central fact of our lives. And what we have is something else, something I don't have a word for. A companionship of the similarly wrecked, maybe. It's one of the most valuable relationships I have, and it operates in a category the language doesn't really cover. If you're widowed and you don't have a Marie, I tell you to find one. There is almost certainly somebody within 10 miles of you in the same condition. And the odds are they're also sitting in a house wishing they had somebody they didn't have to explain anything to. And I'll tell you how it actually started. Because it wasn't graceful, and I want to take the mystique off it. About 6 months after Bob died, I was in the truck and I drove past the end of their road. And I thought, I should call Marie. And then I didn't for another 2 months, because I couldn't think what I'd say. What do you say? Bob's dead and Helen's dead, and how are you? It seemed impossible. Eventually I called anyway, with nothing prepared. I said something like, Marie, it's Walter Brennan. I've been meaning to call for a while and haven't. And she said, I know how that is. And that was the whole opening. It took 9 seconds and I'd spent 2 months not doing it. Then I said, would you want to have lunch sometime? And she said yes immediately, in the tone of somebody who'd been waiting for somebody to ask her something. That's how it goes in my experience. The approach feels enormous from your side. It is a very small thing from theirs. They are also alone in a house. They are also going weeks without a conversation that means anything. The odds that they say no are much lower than your fear suggests, and the cost of them saying no is close to zero. And the cost of never calling is that you both sit in separate houses for the rest of your lives, with the thing you each needed available a phone call away. I nearly didn't call. That's the part I think about. There's a version of the last 5 years where I never picked up that phone, and in that version, I don't have the one relationship where I don't have to manage anything. And I'm meaningfully worse off, and I never know it because you don't know what you didn't do. The fires burned down. I want to say a few things now about the 5 of them together, because the arrangement matters more than any individual piece of it. Here's what I've come to understand. When people think about loneliness, they think in terms of quantity. How many people do you see? How often? And quantity matters some. But the thing that actually determines whether you're isolated is coverage. There are several distinct human needs that connection serves, and they're not interchangeable, and you need each one covered by somebody. You need somebody who knows the whole story, so you're not permanently reduced to your last chapter. That's David. You need somebody who notices, so that when something goes wrong, there's an outside instrument reading you. Because your own instrument fails exactly when you need it most. That's Susan. You need somebody who brings the new, so your world keeps getting bigger instead of closing. That's Lily. You need somebody physically near, so that you exist in the world, in a bodily way, and not only over a wire. That's Elaine. And you need somebody who's in it with you, so there's one place where you don't have to manage anybody's feelings about your situation. That's Marie. 5 functions, 5 people. If you've got them, you can be alone 22 hours a day and be entirely all right, which I generally am. If you're missing 2 or 3 of them, you can have a busy social calendar and still be in the condition Frank was in. And I'd tell anybody listening to do the audit. Sit down and go through the 5. Who knows the whole story? Who notices? Who brings the new? Who's near? Who's in it with you? Write down names. And where there's a blank, that's not a small thing. That's a hole in the structure, and holes in the structure are how people end up like Frank without anyone seeing it coming, including themselves. Some of the blanks can be filled by the same person, incidentally. Helen was all 5 for 54 years, which is what a good marriage is, and it's why losing one is so catastrophic. You don't lose a person, you lose an entire structure at once. Part of what took me 2 years was that I was trying to replace her with one thing when what I needed was to rebuild 5 separate functions from scratch. That's worth sitting with if you've lost somebody. The reason it feels so total is that it is total. She knew the whole story. She'd been in most of it. She noticed everything. She was the outside instrument for 54 years, and she was extremely accurate. She brought the new because she was curious about things and dragged me toward them. She was physically there, in the same rooms, every day, and she was the one person I never had to explain anything to or manage in any way. All 5. One woman. And when she died, it wasn't one loss. It was 5 simultaneous structural failures. And I spent 2 years trying to figure out why the ordinary consolations weren't working. They weren't working because I was treating it as a single hole when it was 5 holes, each of which needed a different kind of filling. I'd say to anybody in the first year or two of a loss like that, don't expect one thing to fix it. There isn't one thing. There's 5 things, and they all have to be built separately, and it takes years, and that's not a failure on your part. That's just the size of the job. And I'd say, the reverse to anybody still married at 50 or 60. Your spouse is probably doing all 5 of those jobs right now, and you almost certainly haven't noticed. And whichever of you goes first will leave the other with 5 holes at once. That's an argument for both of you having some of the other 4 covered by other people while you can. Not because the marriage isn't enough, but because it's carrying more load than either of you realizes. I'll say the last thing now, and it's the one I most want somebody to hear. Every one of these 5 relationships requires work from me. Not enormous work, but work. David calls on Sundays without fail, but I make sure I have something to say. I think about what I want to ask him during the week. Susan calls on Thursdays, but I call her on other days so she isn't only my nurse. Lily writes, but I write back, and writing a real letter to a 20-year-old takes me the better part of a Sunday afternoon, and I do it because if I stopped, she would eventually stop too. Elaine comes for coffee, but I've got to have the coffee on, and be somebody worth having coffee with. Marie and I have lunch monthly, and about half the time, I'm the one who calls to arrange it. None of these things maintain themselves. Every single one of them would thin out and disappear within a year if I stopped tending it. That's the thing about being old and alone that I most want to say plainly. The web does not hold itself up. When you were working and married and raising children, the web maintained itself. The structure of an ordinary life kept throwing people at you. That stops. When it stops, you become the sole maintainer of every connection you have. And if you don't do the maintaining, the connections go, one at a time, quietly, without anybody deciding anything. That's what happened to Frank. Nobody abandoned Frank. Frank stopped tending and the web came apart on its own schedule. And by the time it mattered, there was nothing left. So I tend it, every week, 5 people. It is genuinely some of the most important work I do, and I do it on days when I don't feel like it, which is a fair number of days. And I want to be honest about the not feeling like it because I've said it lightly, and it deserves better than that. There are weeks, usually February, usually when the light's been bad for a long stretch, when every one of these 5 feels like a burden, when the phone weighs 11 pounds, when I look at Lily's letter on the table and think, I'll answer that tomorrow, and then think it again the next day, when Elaine's headlights come down the road and some small part of me wishes she'd keep going. That feeling is not a signal that the relationships are wrong. It's a signal that I'm in a bad stretch, and the bad stretch is precisely when the pulling away instinct is strongest, and precisely when acting on it does the most damage. The instinct is exactly backward. It wants you to withdraw at the moment withdrawal is most dangerous. So I've made a rule for myself, which is that I don't get to make decisions about the web during a bad stretch. If I don't feel like calling David on a Sunday in February, that's not information. That's weather, and I call him anyway. If the letter feels like too much, I write 3 lines instead of 2 pages. But I write. If Elaine's coming, I put the coffee on. Because here's what I know about Frank, thinking back on it now. Frank didn't decide to isolate himself. Frank had a bad stretch and made a series of very small, entirely understandable decisions during that bad stretch. Didn't answer this call, skip that thing, let that invitation go. Each one was nothing, and by the time the bad stretch passed, there was less web there than there had been, which made the next bad stretch worse, which produced more small decisions, and so on down. Nobody falls off a cliff. Everybody walks down a very gentle slope in bad weather with their head down. I'm alone in this house nearly all the time. It's quiet here. It's been quiet for 7 years. And I am not isolated, and I will not be isolated, because 5 different people are going to hear from me this week, and each one of them holds up a corner of something that would fall down without them. If anything I said tonight reached you, you can subscribe to Walk With Me a while longer. I read every comment. Do the audit and tell me how you came out. Tell me which of the 5 you've got and which one's a blank. I'd like to know, and I suspect a lot of other people would find it useful to hear. Take care of yourself. Call somebody first. Write the letter. And don't let the web come apart quietly the way Frank's did. And if there's one blank in your 5, fill that one this week. Not all of them. 1. The phone call you've been putting off for 2 months the way I put off calling Marie. It'll take 9 seconds and you've been carrying it for 8 weeks. The fire's banked. The coals will hold till morning. I'll see you next time.